Chapter 211. On a scorching day at the United Nations headquarters, the atmosphere inside was incredibly tumultuous. Leaders from all nations had gathered, their countries in a state of devastation. The conference room was filled with uproar, as they couldn't comprehend why the Australists were wreaking havoc everywhere, causing a horrifying number of casualties. Especially puzzling was when Australia had become so infested with Australists. The elderly blonde man began to condemn the countries in Australia for their lack of responsibility. For years, they hadn't detected any threats. Wasn't this incompetence? Suddenly, dozens of Australists appeared everywhere, pushing humanity to the brink of a new extinction, not much different from the marine invasion 3 years ago. As he spoke, his sweat trickled down, knowing that his words held little meaning at this point. But instinct always made him want to blame someone else. Yes, that's human nature. Below, the devastated countries were calling for the United Nations to continue supporting them and even increase their support. Otherwise, their nations would be extinct within a month. At this point, the China Federation became the focus, like a star, because after all, they had coexisted with a terrorist monster for many years, endured countless devastations from the mutant tree, but they still stood firm. Hearing this, the chairman of the China Federation grimaced. They didn't know that the existence of the China Federation was so fragile. Every morning, he would review the map of Misty Mountain. Their peaceful existence was due to an unsigned agreement between the Divine Tree and the local government. He himself knew that the Divine Tree was silently infiltrating everywhere in the Federation, and even many strong men had followed the Divine Tree and were merely acting as human strong men. In general, these people were just a new puppet show, and he decided to say nothing. The chairman of the United Nations called for specific solutions before these Australith laid eggs, or everything would end and humanity would also end. There was a stir below, because according to the information they had, there were 10 Australiths in total, all of which had reached the 4th order, while humanity only had 5 people who had reached this level. It seemed that they still didn't know what was behind the destructive demons, making all their efforts futile. A few people began to discuss trying to coexist with the Australiths like the China Federation did, because after all, their countries didn't even have a 4th order warrior. These words fell into the ears of the chairman of the United Nations, and he immediately turned pale with horror. He had never seen humans negotiate or even lower themselves before monsters just to survive. He angrily shouted, "Are you all insane? The Australith is an intelligent creature. Do you think it will leave any danger behind by letting you live? This is the time when we need to unite." At this point, the chairman of the China Federation finally spoke up, his voice full of stern indignation. If Australia ends, don't dream that any country can continue to exist. At this moment, at the television station of the National Alliance in Australia, even from the outside, one could hear the eerie laughter. Inside, a humanoid figure named Dark Shadow was busily setting up a live broadcast, much to the horror of the employees in the building. The director had no idea who this man was. He just barged in and no one could stop him. Meanwhile, his assistants were deeply concerned, for ever since this guy appeared, they all felt like they were on the brink of death. After studying for a while and vaguely understanding the operation of these devices, Dark Shadow decided to command in a harsh voice, "Help me conduct a live broadcast to the whole world. If anyone dares to run away, I will annihilate the entire city." The employee behind him turned pale with fear upon hearing this. He knew that this guy was not joking, and with the oppressive, suffocating feeling and absolute pressure he brought, they understood that he was not lying about his power. The live broadcast room staff turned to look at the building's director, waiting for his orders. Of course, the old man had no choice. He was sweating profusely, and he nodded. And so, Dark Shadow's voice echoed everywhere on this planet. Some people asked what language he was speaking. I think it was English. On the TV, his hoarse voice rang out, "Humans, can you hear me clearly?" Everyone was surprised by this seemingly unfriendly voice. Was the TV station out of staff, or what? People everywhere began to be curious and continuously accessed this live news. Meanwhile, in the conference room of the United Nations, an employee rushed into the room, announcing that there was an emergency and asked everyone to immediately open the television news of the Australian continent. Everyone was surprised. But of course, they all opened their phones, and the conference room also opened a large screen. As soon as it was turned on, a strange face appeared. He was as gray as a corpse, bald, and in the middle of his face was a pitch-black eye with blood-red pupils. A few faint-hearted people fell to the ground. The rest were trying to act tough, but their backs were soaked with sweat. Don't ask why. Just by looking into that eye, one could immediately feel their primal fear. Dark Shadow began to introduce himself as Dark Shadow and not a human. He declared that humanity had felt the horror of Australia, but there was one thing humanity did not know, that all Australiths were sent by him. Those who heard this immediately felt a chill. Does there exist a being in this world that can command all those destructive demons? Dark Shadow continued, I believe that by now, you all know how much power I have, right? But this is nothing. I still have 50 more Australiths, and I will send them all at once. As he spoke, he gave a creepy smile that terrified humanity. Damn it, upon hearing this, many people immediately gritted their teeth in anger. Those in the devastated areas immediately fainted. What? 50 more Australiths? This is the apocalypse. Isn't this going too far? Dark Shadow continued to arrogantly declare his forces. In addition to the Australiths, I have 1,000 monsters that have reached the transcendent Fourth Order and countless Third Order monsters. We will annihilate all of humanity on this planet soon. As these words fell, the cameraman began to want to run away, feeling guilty for continuing to broadcast the most horrific broadcast in history. But suddenly, Dark Shadow's tone became somber. But I will give you a chance, give you a piece of land and continue to reproduce. Upon hearing this, the politicians and statesmen hurriedly asked loudly, What opportunity? Dark Shadow knew that even the top brass were straining their ears to hear the survival opportunity. He continued to say, That is, attack the divine tree. The people felt strange and somewhat confused. Why was the mutant tree relevant? Even the mutant tree was the belief of some cities, always appearing when humans were in danger. Dark Shadow reiterated, for this was the focus of his broadcast. I repeat, as long as you can erase that tree, you can definitely survive in a corner. Chi Zi showed the divine tree and Xiao Ling on his phone. The mood of the divine tree became complicated. Not understanding why this Dark Shadow was so ostentatious, even thinking of pushing the divine tree to the opposing side with humanity. Suddenly, Dark Shadow's voice calling the divine tree rang out on the screen. Big tree, are you also watching? Remember what you said, that is to defeat me, even if these humans are nothing. But watching you and them fight is also an entertaining show for me, haha. He laughed with his eyes shining with endless death. He was playing with the lives of all humanity. The chairman of the United Nations immediately sank down. He felt that human dignity at this time was not worth an ant. Dark Shadow began to challenge the divine tree, saying that he would come soon, and when he came, he would execute all the divine tree's followers in front of the divine tree. The divine tree immediately frowned. His eyes became sharp and cold, as if he was restraining the destructive beast within him. Dark Shadow ended the broadcast, saying that to prove to humanity that he was not lying, he would let everyone watch a very spectacular fireworks display, along with the entire city being flattened, and so his whole body began to gather countless purple blood light particles, accompanied by a terrifying howl. This howl was caused by the excessive accumulation of spiritual power. His whole body in an instant turned into a light body, and a muffled sound rang out, but the people in the broadcast team were immediately dissolved. Then the building, then the explosion spread to the whole city. People all over the world had lost the signal. The female president tried to find another image of that city but saw nothing. Everything had become ashes. Meanwhile, the chairman of the China Federation remained silent, knowing that the divine tree was in the territory of the China Federation, even though they had fought with the divine tree to the point of skin and bones. But in the end, it was the thing that had kept this place safe, making the whole Federation basically peaceful. He didn't know how to act for a moment, listen to a demon or listen to a tree. Both of these things were not human, but in terms of credibility, it seemed that the divine tree was much better than that strange demon. As for the city where the demon had just been, it had truly become a piece of hellfire. He stood still in the flames, feeling the smell of burning flesh and the crackling sound of the fire burning with a completely emotionless face. Only his eyes were shining with endless death. End of chapter 211.